Intel 12th Gen CPUs have landed, and we've got hands on to see whether these are worth it for your next build. Could Intel finally be back on top? Spoiler alert, I think they just might be. To celebrate, we're going to build an awesome system around the Z690 chipset with a 3080 Ti, the brand new i9-12900K, and see just how crazy we can get. As if that wasn't enough, this box here contains some RAM, brand new DDR5, and the box is huge. We've got Gen 4 storage, we've got an insane case, and a CPU cooler with a screen. I am so excited for this build. I hope you guys are as well. Make sure to get subscribed before we dive into it, but I mean, let's just do this. I'm going to start this video off a bit differently by looking at the CPU and our RAM and getting those unboxed first. I'll then be talking you through all of the other components as we put this system together before booting it up later to see just how well our 12900K and by extension the new i5 chip from Intel perform. Now Intel were very kind and sent us some processors in advance of the official launch so we could take a look and evaluate performance figures for you guys. They sent us it in this really nice Intel unboxing kit, so if we open it up, you can see here it says built for the next generation of gaming. I sure hope so. And then we get this lovely little Alder Lake placard here with kind of the internals of a CPU alongside this lovely Intel acrylic stand that I believe clip together. A little something like that. That's quite a nice little ornament, and I'm sure that will have a place in the set of our videos for a long time to come. Underneath here, we've got some CPUs. We've got the brand new Core i9-12900K and the i5-12600K. These chips are a complete generational shift away from what we saw with 11th gen, which is essentially a slightly faster 10th gen with less cores and better clock speeds. One of the big advantages as well of the new 12th gen chips is that they support DDR5 memory. This is of course the biggest change that we've seen to RAM standards in what, like 6 years? And to celebrate, Corsair has sent us this. I'm so excited to see what's in this. It's a lovely white box that's filthy already, so sorry Corsair. But in here, oh my goodness, we've got some Dominator Platinum RGB DDR5 memory. This is the special DDR5 edition, so that's quite cool. And then under here, I have no idea what this is, but I've heard from the guys in the office who've already had a bit of a play that it's very cool. So we take this off. And we've got what looks to be like a big placard of some description. It's brown and blue, and it says on the back of it, 4 out of 50. Okay, this is a bit bonkers. I believe, upon further investigation, oh my god, it's actually see-through. See my hand? This is all acrylic, and it's blue. It's actually a chopping board for cutting-edge performance. Corsair, you are hilarious, and you are just marketing geniuses at this point. This is awesome. It's so heavy as well, like really heavy. And I think that's actually a RAM DIMM inside the acrylic. Like, what on earth? That is so sick. At Christmas last year, Corsair sent me like a baking kit, so I think they're secretly on a mission to kit out my entire kitchen when I buy a house with some Corsair branded kitchenware. That's enough of that though. Let's actually go ahead and explore DDR5, explore our CPUs, and I think the best way to do that is by installing it all into the motherboard choice for this build. Another first. This right here is the Gigabyte Aorus Z690 master board. Now this is brand new, of course, exclusively for these 12th gen CPUs. It's got support for PCIe 5 and supports DDR5 memory. It might just be one of the most insane motherboards I've ever seen for a few reasons. Our GA1700 support is expected for the latest 12th gen processors. We've got this shielding on our RAM DIMM slots, which support DDR5 memory. The world's tallest M.2 heatsink. I mean, what is that? It's mental. I'm hoping that won't interfere with thick GPU backplates. It shouldn't do. We've then got 2 full-length PCIe slots down the bottom with this really nice sort of heatsink over our chipset. Bit of an unusual design as we discussed in our recent unboxing video. You can see at the rear of the board, we've got Wi-Fi 6 here, I believe it is. We've then got all of our USB 3.2 ports. So these are all our 10 gig ports with a pair of USB-Cs. And we've also got 10 gigabit Ethernet. I love it when this is on a motherboard. It's so great for those enthusiasts out there. For people like us who edit video and we want to connect up to a 10 gig server, picking up one of these on its own will cost you like a few $100s. So as much as this board is not cheap by any means, latest pricing and availability can be found at the affiliate links in the description below. Bit of a mouthful, that one. It will actually provide a good bit of value if it gives you the features that you're looking for anyway. In terms of installing the CPU, this is actually a slightly different process with the new Intel chips than what we've seen before. You might also notice that the socket is sizably larger than on the last gen CPUs. So as well as Intel shrinking that die down, they've made the socket bigger, more processor for your money. And money is actually an interesting point. These chips have got some really, really competitive retail pricing, which is really nice to see from Intel and absolutely does show the competition that AMD have provided in recent years. The socket actually folds out in a kind of cool mechanism that's more like Threadripper than what we're used to with Intel, but that's fine by me. We can then go ahead and drop the chip in. I'm a bit more nervous than usual. This feels like quite a big moment. Before actually popping the cover down, the black socket cover will also pop off at this point, and then securing it down with our retention arm. Apply a bit of pressure, but no force, nothing like that, and the CPU is installed. With that, we can go ahead and install our RAM or our memory today. This right here is a kit of Corsair's Dominator Platinum DDR5. I've been a big fan of the Dominator range for many years, with Capellix RGBs that are super, super bright, and all in all, a really nice design that actually feels quite heavy. These are going to be perfect today. If you're looking to make a more value-oriented build around the 12th gen processors, we will have content for that, but this is intended to be a bit more balls to the walls today. We're really pushing the boat out and going as far as we can go in terms of getting some really great components. Not too much has changed on the RAM DIMM front. You just need to pull back the second and fourth clips if you're using 2 DIMMs, or all 4 clips if you're installing 4. It's then a very simple case of lining the notch on the memory up. It's much further over to the right, I think, with DDR5 before clipping it into place nice and easily. Repeat for as many DIMMs as you've got, in our case just the 2, but they are 16 gigs, so we've got 32 gigs of memory, which should be a nice amount for our Ryzen. For our Intel Core i9, I'm so used to building Ryzen PCs because Intel just haven't been competitive, so it feels good to finally be able to say that. Now there is one more thing we need to actually install before I go ahead and slide the motherboard out of the way, and that's our M.2 storage. I think to do this, we need to take off these 4 screws here and remove the whole sort of heatsink assembly. So let's do that first. What on earth am I seeing right now? Is that really like 4 Gen 4 NVMe slots? All in, like, that's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. The bottom 2 are slightly shorter. The top 2 are like full length, but even then I don't think you need all that length when it comes to M.2s. And you get thermal pads on here as well. I think we're going to use the top slot. It's a good general rule of thumb. And for the storage, I've gone ahead and picked up what is widely regarded as the best Gen 4 NVMe drive on the market. This is the Seagate Firecuda 530 with read and write speeds both in the region of 7 gigabytes a second. This thing is kind of insane. You can get it with a heatsink or without a heatsink. I don't want to go for the heatsink version today because then we wouldn't be able to pop this thing back on. That's the only disadvantage I can see, is that if you did pick up a drive with a heatsink, you then have to reveal and expose all of this, which is obviously not something that I think would look particularly good. The 530 is an awesome drive though. It will help to make sure we don't encounter any storage bottlenecks, something that is becoming increasingly more common when you pair up a 3080 Ti with a CPU as powerful as this one. Make sure you actually remove the protective film from the heatsink on your thermal pad. That is a little bit difficult, so you might need to just get a screwdriver in there, just dislodge the blue film a bit before peeling it up. We're then able to really nice and easily slide our Firecuda drive into place. 45-degree angle, push it down onto your thermal pad, and then use one of these, a teeny tiny little screw and a teeny tiny little screwdriver to actually fasten our drive into place. Don't go ahead and drop it like I just did. This stage of the process can be super, super fiddly, so take it nice and slowly, be nice and careful. Then remember, of course, to remove the thermal pad on the bottom of the M.2 cover as well. And then once you've done that, we can fasten this. Just checking I got the right one. I did indeed. Fasten this back down nice and easily. 4 screws again to secure it into place, and that's pretty much it. One big advantage here is that you can access all of your M.2 drives in one foul swoop, although I do imagine you'd need to take out the graphics card, so there's pros and cons to the approach, but I think the board looks absolutely awesome either way. Once our motherboard then is nicely in the bag and complete, we can move on to the case. Now for this build, I didn't really know what case to go for. There's some exciting options on the market at the moment, but I think the Corsair 5000 series might just be the most refined. I've actually opted to go for the airflow version of the case, which doesn't normally come with included RGB fans. But because our cooler has some RGB fans included, we can get the best of both worlds, airflow and RGB. As usual, I think we want to strip down all of the side panels on the case first, before going ahead and attempting to screw the motherboard in. So that's the glass tempered side panel on the left and the right hand side, and then our mesh grills on the top and the front of the case respectively. Once you've removed all of the side panels, it's then a case of screwing the motherboard in. Flip it around to the rear and locate each of the standoff holes. So we've got 3 at the top, 3 across the middle, and 3 along the bottom, which we'll try and circle on your screen now. These need to align with the case, where we already have 3 at the top, 3 across the middle, and 3 along the bottom. Really, really nice bit of luck from us there to have all of those in exactly the right place from the outset. This board also has a built-in rear I/O shield, meaning all we need to do is basically slide our motherboard into place, a little something like this, line up each of the holes, and then in theory, the raised center standoff will hold the motherboard in place just for now. Remember, we do need to screw in the motherboard to secure it down and make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And then with that, the motherboard is pretty much in. Next up then is the cooler. Now this is looking ridiculous already. The dark grey graphite, the black of the case, and the massive accents on the motherboard really work well together. And I think things are about to get even better with Corsair's H150i Elite LCD. This is pretty similar, I think, to their Elite Capellix cooler that we really like here on the channel, but it has an LCD screen on it. As if that wasn't good enough, Corsair are actually selling the screen separately, and it fits, it's backwards compatible on a load of their coolers they've released over the last year or so. I love that Corsair have done this. It's a really, really pro-consumer move. Yes, it makes them more money because people go out and buy screens for their coolers, but it makes them a lot less money than people having to replace the coolers entirely. So I've got to give a lot of credit to Corsair on that one. You've got these really nice 3 120mm included Corsair fans. They look pretty good. You've then also got the water block itself with up top here our screen that looks to also have an RGB ring and a nice recess. Screens are by no means new on coolers. NZXT have been doing it for quite a while at this point, and many manufacturers like Asus and even MSI aren't far behind. But Corsair's implementation is normally pretty good. Their IQ software suite is fantastic, so I'm super interested to see just how well this stacks up. You also get this RGB sort of controller hub. I want to see if this mini commander design is the same as what we've got on some of their other coolers. And the good news is it looks to be. So the H150i Elite Capellix, that uses the same interface as this, which I like. I'm glad that Corsair haven't just changed it for the sake of changing it. You also get this nice sleeving as well coming out of the cooler, which addresses some of the problems I had before, where you would see cable fraying and stuff like that. And the sleeving, it sort of embraces the cables rather than trying to hide them and make them super small. You've then, of course, got your lovely 360mm radiator with support for 3 120mm fans. As far as installation goes, let's make our life a bit easy. Let's install the radiator at the front of the case with the fans first and worry about our water block in a second. Because, of course, the mounting process changed a little bit with LGA 1700. And then once that's done, we're going to take this included backplate and just pop this through the 4 holes around the CPU socket itself. You then want to pick up the bag of Intel 1700 male-to-male screws. We're going to screw these around each corner of our CPU itself before popping on the water block and fastening it down with some thumb screws. This all sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is, but hopefully seeing it visually will give you guys a good idea of the exact steps involved. Next up then on the component hit list today is the graphics card. Now we need something that's worthy of matching up with our powerful i9 12900K. And what better option than the RTX 3080 Ti? Well, technically, the 3090, but that GPU is even more out of stock than these cards, and frankly, way too expensive for what it actually is. You don't need the specs of the 3090, and this was actually designed to be a more reasonable alternative to that GPU. I've gone for a Gigabyte card to keep in with our theme today. A big shout out to Gigabyte for lending out the motherboard and the graphics card for this system. Getting hold of GPUs, as you guys know, is super difficult, so we really appreciate being able to continue making this content. If you'd like to learn more about the current GPU shortage and crisis, why it exists and when it might possibly end, check out a recent video we made in the card section now. As far as 4K gaming goes, this is going to crush the latest AAA titles at high and ultra settings, 60 to 100 plus frames per second. As always though, we'll be jumping into detailed gaming benchmarks and of course benchmarks of our lovely 12900K very shortly, so hold tight for that one. Now we could be boring in today's video and we could just install the GPU in the normal way, but something tells me that that's not really what you guys want to see. So I've gone ahead and picked up this. This is the Corsair Premium 16X PCIe riser. So this is going to install into the top PCIe slot on the motherboard and basically just act as like a really big extension cord, but for your graphics card. So slide that in, that will click into place nicely, and then we can actually install the GPU in the vertical GPU mount. We're going to remove the rear 2 screws on our PCIe covers, slide it into the riser, and just try and tuck all this extra slack behind the GPU out of the way. Thankfully, it's quite moldable, so if you bend it in a certain way, it will stay, which is really nice. and it should give us a good PCIe Gen 3 bandwidth. Beware, if you want PCIe Gen 4, you will need to pick up a slightly different riser cable, which can be difficult when it comes to limited clearance underneath the PCIe slot. Just watch out, it can be a little bit tricky. Finally then, all that's left to do is give our system power. Now ideally I would have gone for like an 850 watt unit from Corsair to really tie in with a full IQ system. But the power supply doesn't really light up that much, and I've only got a white one, and I thought that would probably ruin the colour scheme and aesthetic of today's system. That's where this Deepcool PM850D comes in. A no-nonsense 80 plus gold power supply with 850 watts of capacity. That's the perfect amount of wattage for something like an RTX 3080 Ti, and will work super well for the system today. This might seem like a peculiar choice considering it doesn't actually have modular cables. But considering we need most of these power cables anyway, and they're all black, it's going to be fine for me. The 80 plus gold certification and 850 watt output is the most important part. We can screw this in before giving our GPU, motherboard and CPU power. This won't be a full cables and wiring guide, but we have got one of those on the channel, which you can check out in the card section now. And with that, that just about wraps it up for the build portion of today's video. But don't go anywhere because we've got some gaming benchmarks and CPU benchmarks coming up in just a second, after the epic glam montage that you guys have come to know and love. I'll see you in a sec, but first, roll that montage. Oh God, I really hope no one noticed I've had my hair cut. So we've established that this PC build looks pretty sick, but just how well does it perform? That's the all-important question when it comes to Intel 12th Gen. Well, we've actually tested over 15 of the latest and most popular AAA titles, and you can find a summary of all of our results on your screen now. We've also published a dedicated review with more CPU-specific benchmarks, but let's take a look right now at the gaming numbers that we were able to achieve. GTA 5 was actually the first test on our list. We like to test this game out given its inbuilt benchmarking mode and real sense of repeatability. You guys can copy our 4K very high settings configuration and see what results you're able to achieve at home. Here we managed to pull in 152 frames per second on average. This was actually a pretty considerable increase over our comparative testing with the Ryzen 9 CPU, with the 12900K really impressing us here. We also tested out Watch Dogs Legion at 4K ultra settings. Here we achieved 71 frames per second on the 3080 Ti, pushing it to the absolute max with strong 90 and 99th percentile results. We also tested the game out at 1080p for gamers looking to stress the CPU a bit more. Of course, a low resolution puts more demand on the processor and less on the graphics card. I'm happy to report that the frame rate nearly doubled, jumping us up to 135 FPS on average at 1080p ultra settings. But what about Call of Duty's Black Ops Cold War? That's the next title on the list today, and once again provides another set of really impressive results. 4K ultra settings yielded 95 frames per second on average, with strong 90 and 99th percentile results, which showed some really consistent frame rates. As if this wasn't enough, we also tested it with ray tracing and DLSS enabled at 4K, and somehow got higher results than with ray tracing and DLSS disabled. In fact, we managed to pull in 112 frames per second. Once again, 90 and 99th percentiles were strong and gave us some really good numbers. Moving on to Apex Legends next then, at 4K high settings we got 135 frames per second, so sort of esports level frame rates at 4K high, not bad at all, showing that at 1080p you could easily surpass the 200 mark. What about something like Valorant though, the next game on the list today, and most certainly the easiest of the titles, but a game that puts as much strain as possible onto the CPU. Here we managed to get just shy of 350 frames per second on average, with a visual experience that looked pretty stunning. Moving on to Cyberpunk next up then, here we tested out first with ray tracing disabled and then with ray tracing enabled. With RTX off, we got 69 frames per second on average, with 65 and 61. This was 4K medium settings, while the same settings with ray tracing enabled gave us 63 frames per second. Cyberpunk, the most difficult game to run that I think we've ever tested here on the channel, but the fact that we can destroy it over 60 frames at 4K high settings really speaks volumes. Next up then is Fortnite. We tested this at a couple of different settings as well. 1080p first op at high settings gave us 236 frames per second. 99 percentiles were strong as you'd expect. While 1080p competitive settings with everything tuned down to low but the render distance set to far for the best possible frame rates and viewing distance gave us 385 FPS. Quite possibly the highest frame rates we've ever seen at Fortnite 1080p competitive settings. Finally then, the last game on the list today is a bit of Call of Duty's Warzone. At 4K, very high, we got 117 frames per second, and although this game might have fallen out of flavour just a little bit to Apex and Fortnite as of late, we still got some great results, and we're really impressed with not only the 12900K, but the build as a whole. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a big old like rating, get subscribed if you'd like to see more from us. Thanks for tuning in though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.